Thank you, Robert, for joining us today. You recently published an amazing video that was going through all the features that we have available to help to govern application by applying automated testing to it. And we thought we will deep dive into it today by going a little bit further than just going through the technical features, but trying to understand what does it mean for actually the people who are governing all these applications. So let's say that we are now familiar with App Engine Studio and all the other tools that we have available at ServiceNow that is allowing you to build low-code apps. And as a delegated developer, a distributed developer, I can go and submit the new version of an app that already exists. Can you run through the different tools that are available for the people who are in the backend, who are receiving this submission of a new application, and how can they help to implement the guardrails that they have within the enterprise to make sure that there is not an impact on the test and further along the production instance that they are managing, as well as can it actually give us some advice on the best practices of building apps?
Sure. So I guess we'll have a bit of a React style video here where we'll play the YouTube recording and we'll discuss various bits and pieces. I mean, initially when the video plays, we dive straight into test generation. And this is a really powerful feature for low-code users to baseline their applications. So the way that test generation works and the way that COEs and application developers can use this is before they release their first version, or really at any time during the application development process, they can come in here, choose the appropriate scope, the users, which tables they want to baseline and catalog items, and generate a bunch of ATF tests, which will, as I said, kind of like baseline their application, so that when they release this version and release further features in version 2 or version 3, if they change something which changes the behavior of the forms, the behavior of the service catalog item forms, that'll get picked up. So for example, some mandatory fields change or things like that, they can actually that can actually be picked up when those tests are run as part of the App Engine Management Center deployment.
So I guess it means that we can use this generated test to make sure that the next time we will implement a new version of this application, we know that for the first version we generated this test, we have maybe implemented or documented some documentation that we provided to the users, and we know, okay, before to release a version 2 of our application, the system, I guess, will be able to run all these tests automatically, part of the submission process, I guess, of the application.
Yeah, correct.
And I will be able to see, okay, it ran everything smoothly, so potentially the changes that we have done are more like related to the backend of the application. It has no impact on actually the use of the application. Or actually you didn't realize, but one change you did that you thought was on the backend actually has an impact. Now there is maybe an extra step, or a field is not named the same, or something is actually now fielding automatically. So a step must be removed from the automated test. Am I correct? Is that the goal of one of the goals of this test?
Yeah, definitely one of the goals of this. And we're not saying necessarily that citizen developers will come in and generate tests for their own applications. Yeah. But it may be that as part of that submission process for the first version of the application, this might become part of your development practices to generate a bunch of test cases, baseline the application, so that when the team comes back to review and build on top of it and release new features, which may include form changes, those can be picked up as part of the deployment process, or even as part of development. Once the feature is complete, run the test cases and see if there were any changes. If there were, then it's very easy to go back and either update the test to reflect the new state of the application, or to, fix what was broken by that new feature being released.
And you were saying that to run this test automatically is as simple as basically mentioning that these tests are about this application. That's the only link that ServiceNow needs in order to generate this test automatically.
Yeah, you can see here there's a scope that you can choose. And then once you select that scope, it'll automatically filter the tables here. So you can then say, yep, these are the tables that I want to generate tests for.
Excellent.
Yeah. All right, so I think the first part of the video is all about test generation. The next part is around creating unit tests for a particular, in this case, script include. So there's a script include here that there's a bunch of functions here that help to calculate some of those finance requests. And then creating unit tests here about, I think.
So the one we had before was really around user experience, is around, okay, how like
forms.
the employee or the agent will be filling forms and what will be the impact on his user experience. This one is more on like the smartness of the application. Is like, oh, we created this script that is doing something very specific, very advanced calculation, for example. And part of the test suite, part of the test that we can automatically generate and run, we can check, for example, I think you will take the example here to say, okay, for this amount, we're expecting this result from this script. Can you double check that next time we are releasing a new version, the behavior will be remaining the same?
Yeah, correct. So that's all around testing this is over budget function here. You pass in a bunch of test data to it, and then it will test that function. That is you can have your form-based user experience, user interface-based tests, along with your more in-depth code-based unit tests, all in the same test suite as well. So they can run sequentially or logically or at the same time whenever you need them. So this is basically how you would set up one of those test suites, by like inserting some test data and then running those test cases against them.
And that's the beauty, obviously, to be automated, is like you have to build your test data once.
Correct.
You want to perform maybe 50 tests against one specific very sensitive rule. You build them once, and now in 2 months, when you will release the new version, you don't have to run them again. You just go and say, okay, this test should be still valid in the next version. Run them for me.
Yeah, one of the best practices is to make sure that you set up your test data as part of the test suite as well. So that you don't, with the way that instances are cloned all the time, you're not having to like re-import and re-upload specific like XML imports just for testing. You can do it that way, but you can also use ATF to generate your test data and run it against that, which is much more convenient. So this is an example of a low-code test step. So we saw previously the unit test, which when you fill that out, it's very similar to other JavaScript-based testing libraries like Jasmine. Whereas this is kind of like the low-code way of like writing a test to say, if certain fields are set, we want it to test, what is the reaction to those sorts of things.
Excellent.
And this is testing that we can insert a record. So the assertion type here is set. So based on the data here, it should be able to insert this. I think we just talk about like the execution of the tests and how that's actually done.
And all the results of this test obviously will be part of, so for the people who are not familiar, we have a governance tool that we are calling App Engine Management Center. And the beauty is that obviously these tests have been created in a way to, easily be able to test the system, but as well, they will be documented, meaning every time they will run, they will be attached to the deployment records, meaning that if in a year or two from now, when the product owner of an application has maybe changed role or is not available anymore, you can run it and see, oh, we have this behavior. Is that normal? And we can just go kind of the timeline and come back in the version before and be like, oh yeah, that was the same behavior. So it feels like that's a normal behavior. Or no, sounds like we changed something and we have to investigate why.
Yeah, the test suites that are generated, I'll just skip over it. We talked about unit tests. This talks about running the test. So this is running a test kind of like online. The UI tests obviously need to be opened up in a browser to check all the mandatory fields and things like that. We have the cloud test runner, which allows you to do that as a part of a deployment request through AEMC. You can run the ATF through the cloud test runner, so it's fully like automated and offline. And as you said, that is all logged against the deployment request, and you can see the full results of that. Dive into the like the individual test cases to see which failed, all that kind of thing. So for releasing applications, it's really powerful to link your ATF test cases to the deployment workflow, so that when you release your app, test cases are run, and you can be confident that nothing is going to go into production that's poor quality or potentially breaking user experience.
And so what's happening usually that a customer usually will have at least 3 ServiceNow environments. They will have the dev, where the development of this application is done. Next, they will have the test, where unit test and potentially UAT as well are performed. And next, there is, as a minimum, a production instance that we go on. Very often, we see our customers having, some additional environment to have some additional step. But if we do the bare minimum, I guess what we are speaking about here is that we are creating the application in dev and building the application in dev. We are building the testing framework in dev as well. But because App Engine Management Center is linking all these instances together, it knows that when this application will be migrated to test, and we will see that it's done automatically through the governance tool that we have that will trigger approval, and the team behind it doesn't have to physically say, oh, I want to move this application from here to here, but it's tracked in a system and performed automatically. And now it will bring as well all the automatic testing with it and give you all the results in your governance tool. So I feel like it's accelerating a lot, basically, the management of this application. We don't need to do things again and again and make sure that people are doing their tests manually. You can rely on the system that has been implemented the first time to be able to make sure that the next time the product has a new version, all the test is coming with, basically.
Yep, exactly. So it really does help accelerate application development, especially the testing part of it, which is all part of, the app dev is not really finished until you retire the application. So part of the release process, being able to generate tests, have those linked and have those run every time you deploy, even if it's like for a 0.1 version, that's always gold.
Excellent.
So one thing that we don't necessarily talk about in this video, but is still interesting. Oh, we do talk about it at the end, instance scan. I'll just quickly go over this screen we're seeing here. So this is what the form may look like when it's when test generation is run. So you'll basically have open the form and then make the assertions on field visibility, mandatoriness, etc., etc. So that's kind of just like a baseline. If these tests fail, it's because the form's changed, mandatoriness has changed, visibility of the field has changed. maybe that's something that you do want as part of that new feature, but at least we can catch, you can catch that before you deploy it to prod, make sure that there's no unexpected changes. Or if there are,
this has been generated automatically, right?
Yeah, that's right. Or if there are changes, you can document them, right? And you can say, yeah, in this new version, these field changes have been made, etc. Yeah, probably one of the last useful tools within for development teams as part of the development practices is running instance scans as part of a deployment as well. So tests will test your functional, like how your application operates, but your instance scans should really test your best practices. Like, what are your common development practices? What are your, what are some of the things that you want to enforce? And for a citizen developer, it may be that you want to enforce the fact that if they've written any code, that it be flagged and, peer reviewed by somebody who has a little bit more experience writing code. So those are sorts of things that you can set up in instant scan, which won't necessarily be like a pass-fail with regards to the test, but it will just be an extra trigger as part of your deployment process to potentially say, okay, this application needs further review because it contains a business rule.
So I guess the people who are managing App Engine Management Center, so the governance tool, they have access to the workflow and the process that are being triggered for each step of this process. Does it mean that they could go in this process and go to say, oh, based on the results of this health check, I would like to add this action or add this approval? Is that something that they can do?
Yeah, it's something that's definitely possible. How far you want to go down the automation pathway of modifying that deployment workflow to trigger automated actions based on the results of some of these things. It's always an option for customers to do, but it should definitely be at least a manual process to review this and then find the important ones. Did they all pass? So it may be that, for the example I gave before, if you have a citizen building an application, you want to flag when certain application features have been created. So it may be that you allow citizen developers to create business rules, but if the advanced box is checked or they've filled out the script field, you want to flag that and say, hey, this application needs a specific review. And you can create those instant scan checks and run them just against, the application itself.
So we see, for example, in your example that we have 550 checks that are being done. They are, I guess, the out-of-the-box one that are coming with for all our customers. They will be able to run them. And they are basically how do we ServiceNow test our development, basically. When we are developing on ServiceNow as well, this is what we'll be checking. But obviously, our customers want to implement their own guardrails. They want to implement their own processes. They will be able to come here and say, okay, I want to implement a new security check or performance checks or normalization check. Tell what is the priority of it, the description, and what is the kind of return that he will give to me. And now part of all the deployment, all the request of pushing the new version of an application, this new check will be run.
Correct.
And the team will get the result automatically when they will go in the governance tool.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, they'll open up AEMC, they'll see the deployment has reached test, and they'll see the results of both ATF and if it's enabled. You have to make sure that you link the correct scans to your flow. But once that's set up, it'll happen automatically. And you can see here, one of the out-of-the-box ones is to make sure that access controls are being set on tables. So if a developer releases a new table with no ACLs on it, no roles set, people have access to that automatically. So that's definitely a scan you want to pay attention to. So you can collate these into a group of scans that you're interested in as part of deployment. Obviously, you don't necessarily need to run all of these every single time for a particular application. You may just have a subset that you run. But these are different to ATF. They're not functionally, your app will still function if these are flagged, but it may be it's a bad development smell, or like you're going against a best practice that your team has decided upon. So
and that's what we want. We don't want a tool that is allowing you to build whatever you want in terms of user experience, but as well that is complying with your organization governance.
Yeah, and exactly.
This is what it will enforce here.
Each organization will have their own, governance like strictness that they want to enforce, and what they adopt as part of their development process, as part of their development practices, is up to the organization. Obviously, ServiceNow has a bunch of, best practices or starting points that organizations can adopt. But as they evolve their citizen development program, as they evolve their pro development program, they might want additional checks, additional governance layers that they implement. And that depends on your industry. You may have regulatory implications that you want to also include in your development practices. So it really varies from organization to organization, but we have the tools that are flexible enough to include those.
Sensitive information, I think we can as well go and see, like, are we capturing this type of information in this application that maybe doesn't need, that it should not be there. But again, maybe it means that it has a different layer of approval or security that has to be added on top.
Yeah.
And is there anything in all these tests that could help as well to understand what could be the performance impact of implementing a new application?
Yeah. So I forget the order of this. Hang on a second.
Because obviously that's a classic ask. Is like, okay, that's great. We can now control what people are doing, but obviously ServiceNow with its single architecture, single data model, people are scared of, but will it slow down actually my instance?
Correct. Yeah, so we have, as part of the ATF test suite, you can choose to run performance tests instead of just functional tests. Again, you can run it through the Cloud Runner, and what you will do is you'll profile your application based on those tests, and you will get a result set for that performance test similar to this. So we've got an application for this expense report app. We've run 2 performance tests, 1002 and 1005. And right now we're comparing the 2. So between the first run and the second run, what are the differences in time to run these various tests? So it may be like, how long does it take for the form to load? How long does it take for all the business rules, all the flows, etc., to run after form submission? These are all the types of tests you can performance profile. So while they might be testing functional things, you can also test how long it takes your app to do that sort of thing. So if you introduce a new feature which has a new business rule, and you're running a massive query on your update, before update business rule, you can see the impact of that performance here.
So what we see very regularly is you're starting with pretty simple applications. You're testing a concept. Like this team wants to create an application to do that. Okay, you do a minimum investment, you do a few forms, and you see that there is traction, and now you want to release more automation. And this is where maybe things could go wrong, right? It's like, for example, they are building an application using an API with a third-party tool, and people start to complain that things are slow, for example. I guess this could prevent us to have this kind of user feedback, right? Is I'm bringing the version 2, I'm running my test, and actually I'm realizing that the insert of a record is taking 5 times the amount of time than before. This kind of tests will help us to diagnose this kind of, well, not diagnose, but spot this kind of issues.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it will help diagnose because you'll be able to see exactly which operations are causing that. So it may be on record insert. It won't. Yeah, I get your point. It won't like if you've got 4 or 5 different business rules running, it won't pinpoint which one is particularly slow, but at least you'll be able to see like if it's just a general complaint on like slowness, where the issue is, loading form, inserting records, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's another tool in the toolbox for program managers to start implementing or start using to make sure that the quality of application that's being released is up to your organizational standards.
Excellent. So just to finish, so with all the tools that we spoke until now, like are they all available for customers who have App Engine Management Center, or is there any additional features that they have to activate, or this is basically a standard platform feature?
These are all standard platform features that developers, that instance administrators, platform owners have access to today. So once you've set up your pipeline through App Engine Management Center, you can start turning these features on. So for example, the ATF integration to run test suites, health scan. These are all kind of like optional additional things that you can turn on. Change management integration is another big governance one as well. So these are all available out of the box.
So they are part of the initial setup of your governance as such, not for each individual application. You will be able to say, okay, I want to run this kind of test. I want to link my ITSM change process to the deployment of my application. You do that once, and now for all your pipeline of applications, they will have to run through these gates, and they will be all managed through one interface that is the App Engine Management Center. Yeah,
correct. And it doesn't have to necessarily happen, when at the first stage where you implement AEM. So you can turn these on when you're ready, right? So if you're not currently ready to like have every application have its own ATF test suite, that's okay. You can still do manual testing for a time until you're ready to actually turn that piece on.
And obviously, this is transparent for actually your distributed developers, right? So citizen developer, or you want to call them. For them, the experience is still the same. I'm building a very easy low-code application, and it's really for the people who are governing this application that they know they have all these tools at their disposal, and it will summarize the results of all this action every time that someone is asking for a new deployment. But as a citizen developer, this is not impacting my journey.
No, that's right. I mean, it's arguable whether you ask your citizen developers to also create ATF tests. There is a low-code experience there, but it's not necessarily something that people understand, like how to test. I mean, it might be asking a bit too much for citizen developers to also take on that burden of creating tests. I know pro developers hate that, writing tests. That's why we have quality engineers to do that for them. So it's definitely not something that creates additional burden or friction for your citizen developers, because essentially, especially if you're using test generation, it's kind of like a seamless thing that happens behind the scenes that they don't necessarily know about. They should be included when you're reviewing results, so that they know how their application is functioning, what are the performance measurements or the test measurements that you're actually using as a part of your release program, so that they can better design and develop applications that fit those, that meet those standards. But it doesn't really slow velocity down or anything like that. If anything, it increases velocity because you don't have this constant cycle of releasing something that doesn't necessarily work or is not goes against your development practices, that you have to send it back to the dev team and explain why you need to change a few things.
It should streamline and potentially accelerate your UAT, your user acceptance testing, because
absolutely.
obviously your citizen developer will still be included in this UAT.
Yep.
They will have built something in dev. It will have gone through these different gates.
Yep.
Now it's available in tests. Obviously, the citizen developer has access to tests. We can give access as well to other people to test this application. But even before that, we are starting the manual UAT. We'll have all the results of all the tests that we have performed. So maybe we'll not waste the time of people. We'll be like, there is definitely something here that is maybe working wrong. So let's do a quick fix. Okay, now it's ready for UAT.
The great thing about citizen developers is they are their own stakeholder.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like a development team is sending the app to another team to test in UAT to say, hey, did we meet your expectations with the features we built?
No.
Because while they're building the app, they are constantly testing to make sure that it works for them. So citizen developer as a stakeholder is already, a bit of a velocity enhancement to the traditional development cycle because they are building something that works for them already. But of course, when it comes to like testing with real data, that's where, your partial clone of ServiceNow prod will come in so they can actually test with some real data.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely a productivity enhancement for sure.
Thank you for that. I think I took a few notes while you were speaking. So my understanding is like the few keywords of the feature that we spoke about today was they will help the governance. The different tools that are out of the box in ServiceNow are ATF, Automated Test Framework.
Mm-hmm.
We have the instant scan that was around like all the best practices that we can rank and help with, and that you can customize to add your own best practices, as well as performance testing. And I think you mentioned that performance testing was actually part of ATF. So there are two parts of ATF, kind of the UI side and the performance side.
Yeah, the performance tests run off of the ATF tests. It's just a different way to kind of like profile the tests. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure we will come back to see more advanced features that are available in ServiceNow in App Engine Management Center governance tool for local applications. Thank you, Rob.